Hello and welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. So what is the value of a video ad being shown when you're not competing against so much noise with other ads? Like when you're pumping the gas into your car and the only ad billboard around is the one on the pump itself. If you have an audience in basically a captive state, then how do you connect with them with the right kind of targeted and personalized message that grabs and keeps their attention and hopefully compels them to buy? Sean McCaffrey is the president and CEO of GSTV, a national video network and platform delivering targeted audiences across tens of thousands of fuel retailers in over 200 DMAs reaching 1 in 3 adults. And on this episode, we'll discuss gas stations, TV commercials and video advertising, reach, captive behavior, pause points in the consumer journey, personalization at scale, targeting, electric vehicles, Walmart's gas station sushi, and a lot more. So let's tune in to a GSTV exec with a shark fueled by performance on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Sean, thank you so much for joining me today on A Shark's Perspective. If you could tell us a little bit about your background story, what led you into this business?
Sure. So I'm president and CEO of GSTV. It's a national video platform in 200 plus U.S. markets that reaches 1 in 3 adults. And I've been CEO for a couple of years and having some fun reimagining the business and creating value for our partners. Prior to that, I had a long career at what is now or became iHeart and Clear Channel and got to see really from a front row seat the evolution of radio becoming audio, out of home becoming digital, and this really global medium, and both have really had creative renaissances as well. So always been, I guess, a little bit of a student of marketing and media and where audiences and creativity and especially data in the last decade come together to create some interesting platforms, interesting value. So having a lot of fun with the team here that's grown quite a bit over the last couple of years.
I bet. So what is the size of this market? How many people do you reach in 200 markets?
Yeah, we're in about 205 DMAs today.
Gotcha.
We have 95 million monthly unique viewers. So that's about a third of U.S. adults, and we continue to grow. And the audience and the network can be sliced and diced any number of ways for value. We think about what consumers want, what our retail partners want, how brands and agencies need value. And so we have advertisers who use the whole thing because they want to reach everybody in the summer months, let's say. We have advertisers who think of it as addressable behavioral audiences, geographic proximity, and everything in between. And we program a show that's both content and commercial experience. So in that sense, it's more similar to a broadcast network in terms of how you can think about creatively using the platform.
Well, and so basically the platform is I get out of my car, I go to fill up gas, and one of the newer units that pumps gas has a TV screen on it. And it catches me there while I'm trying to pump the gas, and it shows me different advertisements in video form. Why do you think that's a good form of video advertising?
I think today, as advertisers and agencies, there's certainly a battle for attention and to turn that attention into engagement. When I was considering joining the company, I did sort of 3 concentric circles for the classic Venn diagram, sort of consumer trends and behavior, what's changing, media trends and behavior and what's changing, and then this business and what's evolving. And we have national broadcast level scale. We've got an element of digital addressability. We treat each station like an addressable household in the sense of one of our locations in the Hamptons, let's say in the summer months, might function very differently than something in suburban Detroit in the winter or everything in between. So we've got scale, we've got the ability to measure. It's a naturally data-rich environment to understand where consumers were before and after. And the basic consumer insight is people behave differently the day they fuel. It's errand day, it's stock up day, it's road trip day. So we're super highly correlated to lots of consumer commerce. And so, of course, brands and agencies care about causality. Can we prove that we somehow impacted it? And creatively, it's what was otherwise dead air for consumers. And so we've really gone about reimagining the consumer experience to try to serve what they're interested in. And music and driving go hand in hand. So we've got a music partner in Live Nation. News updates in a short form, sort of consumable content way makes sense. So Cheddar's a news partner of ours. Food, our audience eats a lot. I joke all the time we should probably have an official cholesterol drug our audience eats so much because it's stopping for fuel is usually a quick bite. So we work with First Media and their Blossom and So Yummy properties. Food content makes sense, and the list goes on. So it's not one. It's one-to-one video experience, but it's served at a localized level, a household type level. So you're not getting ads or content served only to you. But simple stuff. Personalization doesn't have to mean one-to-one. It also means Ohio State sports highlights make sense
Thank
in
you.
Ohio, not in Michigan.
Exactly.
One of the things we hear from advertisers all the time is personalization at scale has become such a buzzword, but the creative side of it and the content side of it matters, not just the targeting. So we think I tended to say when I first joined the business, classically one of our struggles for our growth was we didn't fit a legacy silo. It wasn't exactly television, wasn't exactly digital out home. Today, it's really what's driving our growth is those lines are blurrier than ever. Consumers are willing to look at advertising and content if it's relevant to them. When our audience isn't buried in kind of a sea of 300 feet of scrolling every day, can't be DVR'd or skipped, and that's a responsibility to consumers, but it's also an opportunity for brands.
So one of the reasons I'm very excited about this channel, at least from an advertising perspective, is that for the most part, except for people pumping gas next to you or maybe walking across to buy a lottery ticket in the store, is that you're really getting somebody that's sort of in a captive state, similar to when somebody goes through and buys something at a grocery store and they walk through the aisle. And that's why they load it up with candy and magazines or whatever they load it up with today. But it really kind of captures you in that state because you're free from other advertising. How has that been sort of keeping a not necessarily a captive in quotes state, but giving them to where they're really more of a focus than having too much noise going on with other channels? Because for the most part, if you're at home, you've got TV and other video distraction. When you're at the gas pump, you're not going to get 12 other forms of ads except on your phone.
Completely agree, and I think that's well said. So I tend to say it as we're at a natural pause point in the
Yes.
consumer journey. You've stepped out of your vehicle, you have a few minutes to yourself. We take that responsibility seriously to try to entertain and inform without being abusive in that regard. We've got great content partners. We have an in-house content studio. We continue to focus on editorial quality and values all the time. And I think it's that captive moment where there's opportunity. What we have consumers tell us is they listen, they pay attention. We're Nielsen currency. We do watch list and notice surveys,
Sure.
and we do it twice a year, and it's usually high 80s, low 90s. Before I joined the business, I asked for a list of locations around the tri-state area in New York, and I just drove around and looked at about 50 of them and stood there for a few minutes watching people, and consumers watch. They do pay attention, and we see it on social. When we run content that's relevant or funny or interesting, people respond. We do a word of the day that is one of our sort of lighter weight content things, but people respond. Our creative studio had some fun with it and did suborn when some of the perjury things were going on, and we got quite a bit of response there. We've run esports before and woken up to thousands of tweets and millions of social impressions about a ninja clip being on our network. So I think it's further proof that the right content in the right context at the right time, which is sort of that holy grail of what marketers often want to do, it does generate response. So not everything, obviously, that we do is meant to really engage those 95 million people to do something. But we're learning every day, and we focus. We start with the consumer, what makes sense in our space, in our time, and we'll continue to iterate and drive value back to consumers. And then obviously we're held to a higher standard than ever, as all publishers are today. For a marketer, how can I prove an outcome? How can I determine that this media or marketing investment did something to impact my business growth?
When you look at most of the ads that run on these channels, then do you allow people to create content in a different time frame? And I mean different than the typical set of ads you see either on YouTube or on a normal TV station, which tend to run, some short bumper ad, a 15, a 30, or a minute. I mean, can somebody do a 42-second ad and run something that way if the inventory's there? And I think of that because I think this channel is so unique. There are a lot of messages that don't need to be necessarily uniform in the way they're presented.
Agreed. And the simple answer is yes. So the way we look at it from an editorial standpoint is flexibility within a framework.
Right.
So we tend to program, give or take, about a 3.5-minute show every day all over the country. And in theory, every single one of our locations could be running a different show. Oftentimes it's more regionalized or day parted, that sort of thing. But absolutely. So we have standard ad units, lengths, 15s, 30s. We get a lot of 6s and 7s because of obviously social video. But if someone's ad lands at 22 seconds or lands at 37 seconds, we're flexible within that framework. We try not to obviously have everything be custom, but it really does allow for creativity. Some advertisers have vertical and horizontal video, and they're definitely creating for today's environment with a screen is a screen is a screen. Other advertisers have a TV spot or a YouTube pre-roll sort of digital spot, and they'll send it to us. But for a lot of advertisers in our environment, we can also add a direct call to action.
Exactly.
If it's for a QSR or CPG brand, we can actually tell someone to take an action right now. So we'll create an edit of that ad to add a call to action at the end of it. Our in-house content studio does a lot of that, and we also create custom content just for the space. That is that again, right place, right time, right moment. So we balance it. We do a lot of work with creative agency partners because no one has the bandwidth to create custom content for every single platform
Sure.
that's out there today. There's just too many platforms. But how can you sort of nail it and scale it, as some of our brands tend to tell us, where they want the platform, they want the creative consistent across all platforms, but they want the right level of customization for TikTok, Snapchat,
Exactly.
GSTV, etc.
So, if you were going to give advice from a creative standpoint to somebody, you got marketers and advertisers out there listening to the show right now, what kind of content, capturing video to a captive audience at a gas station across the country, what's the kind of content that typically, and I know you could go into a lot of different specifics because I'm sure there's not any one specific cookie cutter formula, but what do you sort of see that rises to the top with creatives?
Sure. We tend to guide people. We have a creative set of guidelines that we send to folks that talks about file sizes and contrasts and
Yeah.
some of the really practical stuff. But we tend to start with suggesting you can think about our platform as lean in versus lean back. Oftentimes, you're creating video with no sound because you want it to stand out in a scrolling social feed, or you're creating a television spot with a really loud sort of element in it because you want to get people's attention back to the screen because they're second screening. You don't have to do any of that with us. You don't have to sort of game the creative to draw attention. It's already one-to-one,
Mm-hmm.
and they're leaned in. And then we give people a brief about our audience. And it's grounded in data. We have behavioral data about our audience on a monthly basis. We did kind of a foundational research study a year and a half ago with MasterCard to evaluate just how consumers transact and learn some insights about the day that GSTV engages. Is ever anything different? Turns out it is. So to my earlier point about content, we send that sort of brief to advertisers, talk about how can you get inside the hearts and minds of our advertisers. One simple example is every one of our advertising impressions is a payment transaction. That's pretty unique. So you've got permission to talk to a consumer about their relationship to money and household budget, and whether you want to talk about a credit card or a checking account, you want to talk about a mortgage and their dream home, or you just want to talk about, the price of a vehicle or a QSR limited time offer window. You've got permission in the setup that we have to talk to people about their relationship with money, because it literally, to consume the media, they're paying for something. So we try to provide a foundational level of audience insights to help our creative partners understand how to create for the space. And then there's best practices on having the bright call to action. If you're going to use music, the types of music to use, that sort of thing.
Well, you mentioned location earlier. So if I'm at a gas station outside of a Walmart, for example, then where are you at the capability with triggering ads, specifically prompting people to either go into the store to buy something or go back and get something they forgot, or if not in store? Are we primarily looking at ads to drive traffic to restaurants, movies, local attractions, and that sort of stuff?
We can customize really any number of ways. So geographic, demographic, and behavioral are often sort of the three basic levers people talk about with us. So I don't need 95 million people and 205 DMAs, but I need this particular segment, and I care about maybe the top 50 DMAs, let's say, because that's how I'm buying broadcast. I care about geographic proximity to Walmart's because it's one of my important sales channels. And I've got some behavioral data about my audience that I want to put against the geo and behavioral information we have about our audience. So we size down, 95 million people to whatever that commensurate audience is, and then we run a campaign only at those stations, or we'll run it day part, days of the week, or we can run it dynamically, depending on the conditions, that sort of thing, and try to balance the client's investment alongside their targeting and audience needs, and then expected outcomes. Obviously, we're like any other platform. If you want to buy the whole thing for a long amount of time, it can
Sure.
start to get to be a significant investment. But the cost of doing business with us in 205 markets and with 95 million people even if you buy that at scale, it is still, in my mind anyway, having been around media for a long time, it's a reasonable CPM and value trade converse to some other things. And it's never one thing. Marketers never, at least in my entire career, no one has said this is the one thing, the silver bullet that's going to solve everything. It's always the tuning of the dials. And today, I think a marketer and agency's job is, of course, tougher than ever because there's so many more options and there's so much data. And folks are, of course, worried about and focused on teasing out the insights of that data to actually drive growth. So we try to be a good partner in that regard and talk about our audience, talk about their mindset, talk about our coverage, our scale, practically how you can buy it, and then land on a solution that's the most effective for that partner.
Well, you mentioned something earlier also that also triggered my memory back with my days working in big data. So, some of the big data partners work with credit card data as well. Are you at the point of being able to make this more addressable and possibly triggering some of the ads based off of credit card data?
So we work with credit card data partners now, and to be clear, we don't collect or ingest any first-party data.
Right,
We're not
right.
taking credit cards, etc. But as you know, as you alluded to, credit card data has been used for years to connect to household behavior and household purchases. And so a number of
Well,
our
and most
partners.
time it's hashed and anonymized, so nobody ever
Correct.
sees any of that. And I worked in that environment quite a lot.
Correct. So we work with partners who talk about, I need to win everywhere. I'm a fast-moving consumer goods, packaged goods brand. I need to win everywhere. My priority channels are big box grocery and C-store. Classically, C-store has been a bit of a data desert for them to get insights. So we have such scale in that sector. It's very valuable in the C-store. Single serve, packaging is of course highly profitable as well, but they care about grocery and big box. So credit card data is one of the things that we use to prove outcomes to advertisers, and they're doing the data match. They're working with their partners to do it. The technology is there where in theory you swipe your credit card and the experience is personalized to you. For a lot of reasons, we don't do that. I don't think the world is ready for that level of personalization. I don't want to be in the first-party data business. And obviously, the world over the last 10 years, much less the next few, is changing dramatically there. Where there's value is consumer opt-in. So some of our retailers have quite sophisticated loyalty programs, for example. So that will be an early place where personalization at a one-to-one level comes into play. If one of our major retailer partners knows it's you and you've already opted into their affinity and loyalty program,
Exactly.
you're accepting of a promotion and a prompt rather than the other content and all the ads only being individually served to you.
Yeah, it's just amazing to your point. As long as it's all done within a data privacy and compliant manner, then emphasis on that anonymization that doesn't let anybody see too much of anybody's data that makes the customer feel bad about the experience or becomes too much of a leverage point. Not talking about Facebook or anybody else by name, but the capabilities with credit card data and location and loyalty, and to your point earlier about when you're out running an errand or buying groceries or whatever, it's just amazing the capabilities of being able to reach somebody physically close to the point of purchase.
Agree completely, and that's one of the huge values. And I also think, to my earlier point about sort of how you define personalization, it's such a fascinating time. I mean,
Absolutely.
The maturation of the digital space. You've had several marketers, major ones in the last year, come out and talk about perhaps they fell a little too in love with the efficiency of digital versus the efficacy, right? Adidas is one that comes to mind. At the A&A Masters in the fall, you had Mark Pritchard on stage talking about P&G's journey with infomercials. And that infomercials, he even joked before all of you in the audience, 3,000 marketers give me a hard time. This may not win awards at Cannes, but it's effective and it drives sales, because he said something to the effect of, we've got a whole generation of consumers who haven't grown up with the brand promise of Tide or all these various products. So demonstrating the products in use are valuable. So infomercials, while I think marketers in many cases maybe would call that something maybe legacy or not as innovative as the latest digital platform, P&G's focused on impact and results. So yeah, it's just a fascinating time. And for GSTV, we're at such a middle ground of sort of personalization, scale, this white space canvas where you don't have programming that you have to worry about bumping, or FCC must carry, or all that. We think it was one of the things, quite frankly, personally attracted me to the business. It felt like it had all the hallmarks of sort of where the audience and market is going, and it was some opportunity to build. And we have a great senior leadership team here and on down through the company that 2.5 years, at least into my personal journey, I'm really enjoying.
Well, I just think it's a wonderful point you made about personalization, and it does not need to say "Hi Kenneth" or "Hi Shark" to be personalized. Knowing my name or my nickname or messing that part of the experience up, most of the time that feels creepy and I don't know, not very
Uh,
authentic. But if you talk about my local sports team, or really localize that content, can make it just as personalized as what you thought you had with some first or third party database with a list of names and email addresses that's only 80% right anyway. So
right.
it's a great point.
Completely agree. Yeah.
So then, if you sort of had to look at intent in the context of ads, kind of go a little bit deeper, if you will, about going, with the ads and with errands and how those ads trigger people to go beyond just the top of the funnel.
Sure. So I've alluded to the size of our audience, and we have this big reach, but as you know, and I'm sure some guests have talked about, cheap reach is everywhere.
Yeah, reach is a
So
dirty word to me.
yeah, and so we've got attention. How do we make that engagement and drive that action? So as I alluded to, we did a study with MasterCard really just to understand how people consume everywhere, all day, online, offline, and then start with the basic question: the day that they fuel up their vehicle, i.e., the day that GSU engages, is anything different? And what we found out is yes, there's a whole lot more spending. As an example, the three biggest consumer journeys after fueling up are grocery, big box, and QSR, and that tracks with logic to me, right? It's a simple errand or two after you fueled up. So as we were sort of reimagining the business a couple of years ago, this idea of I want to be the right place, right time, right moment kept coming up from marketers. So we really looked at then what are we good at? And if you were go to our website and you sort of look up what we do, there's a tagline there: moments that move, moments that matter. Because we discovered what we're good at. We're good at moving people to action right now. Go to a QSR, go inside and buy a lottery ticket, go home and watch this show tonight. We've proven tune in, we've proven sales, etc.
Mm-hmm.
The matter part comes from this serialized and habitual engagement. We're going to see you every week, sometimes twice a week, maybe every other week, depending. But for the most part, 3 to 5 minutes at a time, 3 to 5 times a month. So give or take 15 to 20 minutes uninterrupted of someone's life every month on a very serialized engagement, we can talk to a consumer. So if you've got a brand that it has a much longer cycle, for example, a mortgage I mentioned earlier, or an automobile, converts to a fast food meal or a soda. We're a platform where you can tell your story, bring them in, et cetera, and in a way that if you do it right, you have permission and acceptance to market to them. So we think we're a very solid mid-funnel play. We're not mass reach. There's natural frequency capping, as I said. It's not lowest funnel performance marketing one-to-one where you're sort of dialing an optimization dashboard every single day. But it has the hallmarks of broadcast scale, some of the targeting and attribution of sort of digital muscle memory. And so we think it's the right mid-funnel addition and a very complementary and rather than an or for a lot of, if you will, for a lot of things in a media mix. Because everybody, what we hear constantly is as much as the old 70-20-10 paradigm still holds, right? The
Mm-hmm.
10% sort of blue sky innovation and 70% baked in. There's a lot less faith in the 70% anymore because just audience behavior is shifting. So if you can find attention, you can prove that you can drive engagement, and you can do it at scale, you've got a couple of the table stakes. And as a marketer, I want to talk to you. And that's certainly, especially in the last 12 months, what we've heard at GSTV. And one of the things, quite frankly, I mentioned my background earlier, that radio, for example, has always had reach. But I think marketers struggled with how to use it creatively. And podcasts are a great example of where any one podcast individually may not have the scale of This Is Us or the Super Bowl, but as a medium and as a paradigm, I, for one, I mean, I 2 years ago hardly listened to any podcasts, and today I have a dozen that
Yeah.
I have on my phone all the times, and it's a fantastic way to consume content. And if a brand is underwriting that great content, I'm fine with it as a consumer because it's giving me something that I value. And I'm not just saying that because we're doing a podcast.
Yeah. Well, make sure you add a lucky 13 with a shark's perspective. So.
Of course, of course.
Well, your points are spot on. So, if you went looking beyond into the future, way past the magic 8 ball, and you took a longer term futuristic look at where this is going, especially as we transition what seems to be like a 100-year journey to electric cars, how do you see the near and longer term views of where this channel will go?
For GSTV, we tend to look at it, or we do look at it as we're at the heart of the convergence of the change in consumer transportation and behavior. By that, I mean we work with the retailers and the energy companies. We work with the auto companies, and we have a huge audience of consumers. And by no means is it a binary situation.
Right.
If it's electric, there's not space for an ad-supported model, or if it's petrol, that's the only place an ad-supported model can exist. The fuel and convenience sector in North America today is over 3% of GDP. It's grew 9% in the last year. It's one of the only physical retail channels that's growing, and it's not likely to be Amazon, if you will, anytime soon. And the retailers are not sitting idly by with the change in consumer behavior. Many of them, for those around the country who live in suburbs or so on, understand. I mean, some of these fuel and convenience stores are small grocery stores, are quick serve restaurants, are amazing locations. So we're on a journey with a number of our partners already. We think there'll always be a place for an ad-supported model, you see this around the landscape. I mentioned podcasting, television, public-private partnerships for things like airports or city transportation systems. There's a place for ad-supported models where the exchange of value on all sides makes sense, and consumers, we're all more in control of advertising consumption than we've ever been with ad blockers and time shifting and all that sort of stuff. At the same time, I and the friends and family I speak to outside the advertising bubble, they don't hate advertising. They hate irrelevant advertising.
Exactly.
They hate, badly targeted advertising, and they're willing to exchange. And consumers prove it every day. The free or freemium versions of so many apps are more successful than the paid versions. So we think as long as we keep obsessing over brands, agencies, our retail partners, and consumers, how they want value, how they want to consume, how we can deliver value, we're not in any way concerned about the future. If anything, we're excited about the evolution, and we know it's going to take time. The headlines tend to outstrip, I think, reality. But all of the partners driving that change are partners ready, so we're excited about what's to come.
So, just out of curiosity, what is the best ad that you've seen or best use of ads that you've ever seen on the platform while somebody's pumping their gas? What's been your favorite?
It's like asking me to pick my favorite child, right?
Exactly.
That's a pretty tough one. I will give kudos to Pepsi for not just repurposing the creative that they run everywhere, but really leaning into our creative studio
Yes.
and helping, because of course and I think about, it's the ultimate sort of gladiator arena with the cooler today in a convenience store, right? And so you're trying to get someone to walk literally a 20-foot consumer journey. And Pepsi, while they do a lot of mass brand advertising because they're a big reach company and need to move a lot of product, they are really smart about how they use the platform and allow for customization in our
Mm-hmm.
environment to really prompt someone uh, to uh, to purchase product. So they're probably one of the best. One of the more recent ones, we worked with the Tombras Group, Julie Tombras and Jeff Benjamin, and for Moon Pie. So Moon Pie, I would encourage everybody to follow them on Twitter. They have a great sort of Twitter point of view and personality, a bit self-aware and sarcastic. And so for the last 2 years, they've been teasing about how they couldn't afford a Super Bowl ad, but if they did, here's what they would have done. So they created a very offbeat character called Moon Pie Child. Essentially, it's a family of cannibals that only eat moon pies. Well, so for the third year of it, they decided to have a little bit of fun and actually run national TV, only it was just on GSTV. So they did essentially, you asked earlier about creative length. They did about a 90-second spot
Mm-hmm.
taking over half
Mm-hmm.
of our show just on Super Bowl Sunday, and drove great sort of social sentiment. And they have a very, very engaged consumer audience with them on social. And so they used our national reach to sort of guerrilla market, if you will, the big game, the big show, and something that was very true to Moon Pie's brand. And it makes a lot of sense because we're nearest to their distribution channels of convenience stores and Walmarts and so on.
Sean, I asked this of all of my guests. This is not something that's going to come up much on as far as GSTV goes, but you're talking to a shark who just went diving with sharks again last week. On a shark's perspective, I've got to ask, what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
I love the question. I would say the great white, only because it's one that actually is a gentle giant when you study the
Thank you.
biology
Yes.
and you study the behavior, but it's one that is often, I think, misunderstood by the marketplace. And whether it's Hollywood or so on, has gotten a bad reputation. So I love to sort of focus on where there's innovation or opportunity hiding in plain sight. And I think the Great White is a misunderstood beast.
Could not agree more. And so, well, Sean, it's a special time of this show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions you're going to be asked today?
Fire away.
All right, here we go. Number 1, gasoline or diesel?
Gasoline.
All right, number 2, it's all about the snacks and the candies when you go to the gas station. So, Starburst or Mamba?
Starburst.
Number 3, it's a yes or no question to gas station sushi. Would you eat it or would you not?
Politely, no.
Thank you. I wouldn't either. Number 4, Ford or Ferrari? And we're talking about the Formula One cars and that kind of racing, not a Mustang versus a Testarossa.
Sure. Well, as a company proudly headquartered in Detroit, I've got to go with Ford.
There you go. Number 5, and the most important question you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Cornbread.
This will be the most important question that your board of directors or any of your employees ask you today. So Sean,
now I'm hungry.
Yeah,
now
exactly.
I'm hungry as well.
So Sean, where can people find out more about you, more about the company and the advertising capabilities, and read what you guys are doing in the space and more?
Sure. I would encourage people to connect with our team at GSTV.com and connect with me on LinkedIn, Sean McCaffrey. Happy to chat at any time.
Thank you very much, Sean, for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thanks for having me. Have a good day.
So there was my conversation with Sean McCaffrey, the president and CEO of GSTV, a national video network and platform delivering targeted audiences across tens of thousands of fuel retailers and over 200 DMAs reaching 1 in 3 adults. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, I've always admired the strategy, if you will, around captive audiences, and the advertising was something that goes around that. Think of shopping in a grocery store and you're in the aisle about to check out. They pack in so much because you've got nothing better to do other than wait. So what do? They pack in all the things you might want to buy. It's a great place to advertise. The same goes with why they put TV commercials before movies. What else are you going to watch other than look at your Instagram feed for nothing else important that just happened in the last 5 minutes? So a TV monitor on a gas station pump is, as Sean describes, where you are at a natural pause in the consumer journey. So the challenge to you is think about that natural pause, if you will, and where you can place more contextual ads. Second, reach is somewhat of a dirty word to some degree to me because a lot of marketers simply want to sell the bait, if you will, of a bigger pond to an advertiser or the agency buying the media. However, it's so important again to go back to this to understand where the consumer is, and in this case, literally where they are at the pause point in the journey. If you're an e-commerce only brand, then it depends on your strategy, maybe for awareness, if this is the right play. But if you're also an in-store brand with a heavy point of purchase inside a Walmart, for example, or a nearby restaurant who wants people in seats or to-go buyers, just remember that targeting somewhere close to purchase is extremely important as well. And a lot of that location-based advertising isn't always the best, but at least with these, these are physical platforms in the locations where you're serving them. As he said, though, cheap reach is everywhere. And hey, there's a value to cheap reach. It's just a lesser value. Also remember that the intent to purchase often goes up too when you're actually out shopping and running errands. My point is that you shouldn't discount the size of an audience if it's not the right audience for you or when it's the right purchase time for them. And for this kind of channel, let me also add that the type of advertising content, or length of, in this case, is important. For advertisements, so many people think that they have the bumper ad or the 30-second spot down to a science. Now, we repurpose so many ads on multiple platforms, but I would encourage you, though, to take a second look at the specific form of ads. As he said, don't just repurpose, lean in. Do something different with your content and test and measure that difference. You want to be consistently creative, more than creatively consistent in looking at those ad units. Third, one of the things that not enough people think about with personalization is that your data has some, let's say, wrong to it. Having worked in big data as well at a well-established brand, you've got to understand that even the best data in the world is often wrong. Why? Because it's a moment in time. But people, and those changes are constantly fluid. That fluid is that they move, they get married, pass away, buy that something you wanted to sell them already, etc., etc. And the highest quality data is the best to use. But my point is that most people think that their personalization strategy is perfect. But having peeked inside many CRMs, not nearly enough of them address the fluidity, if you will, and running water of data. We do the best we can. Sometimes you can't personalize well. Now, why do I say all of that? It's because personalization doesn't just mean personalizing everything at the micro level. Sometimes regionalized or localized content can be appropriate enough and just as intimate a level of personalization without the sometimes creepiness of data that's over-personalized. All I ask is that you take another look at your personalization strategy for a different way to offer personalization. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. And remember that if you're in the water, if you're swimming with sharks, just like our guest today said, lean in. Lean in and be a shark. Just keep coming back here and join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.